Welcome to Balance and Beyond, the podcast for ambitious women who refuse to accept burnout as the price of success. Here, we're committed to empowering you with the tools and strategies you need to achieve true balance, where your career, relationships, and health all thrive, and where you have the power to define success on your terms. I honor the space you've created for yourself today. So let's take a breath and dive right in. Before we jump into today's episode, a quick reminder about our free Mastering Time Masterclass, which is on Friday, the 23rd of August. I'm going to be sharing with you the best time management strategies to boost productivity, enhance focus, and stop procrastination in 2024. So if you are trapped in a cycle of busyness, if you're always feeling behind and it's never enough, then come and join us for this amazing free hour where I'm going to be sharing all my strategies. Visit balanceinstitute.com/time to register for free, and I'll see you there. Let's get back to the episode. Welcome, Karen, to the Balance and Beyond podcast. I've got a very special guest with me today. Hi, Karen.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Well, before we kick off, got some very interesting questions for you, and we'll see where this interview goes. But we'd love to hear a little bit about you. Obviously, I guess the hint of a Kiwi accent there.
That's right. So I'm Karen Skinner. I live in Wellington in New Zealand, Aotearoa, and I am a mum to a 9-year-old boy, and have had a really kind of interesting career journey. Not a straight line, lots of different directions, but I guess the big themes in my career have really been around sort of stakeholder engagement and strategy, and more recently into executive leadership. So that's me.
Yeah, it's been a journey. Well, I love talking about leadership and growth and all the lessons that we've learned from that. So I would love, like I said, we'll see where this goes, but what does leadership mean to you? I know you mentioned you've sort of recently stepped up into executive, and it's been obviously been an interesting ride. What have you learned over the last couple of years, or what does it now mean to you? As you said, you've been very reflective lately.
Yeah. So, I guess it means a lot of things to different people. For me, a big part of my kind of leadership journey has been stepping into a more sort of strategic leadership role. So, really working in environments where there's quite a lot of change and quite a lot of complexity, in particular in the external environment, and being able to help teams and organizations really navigate through a lot of that complexity when there's a lot of uncertainty, but you still want to get a sense that you are sort of achieving things and driving towards, goals, even when that won't always be, very clear or very straightforward to get there. So I think that's really been the big development for me over the last sort of few years. I think earlier in my career, I still had some strategic leadership, was a bit more technical. So kind of the path was a little bit clearer, and I just needed to deliver on those kind of projects. But for the development for me has been more into that sort of strategic, complexity space, which is interesting.
It is. And what do you feel helped you get there? Because that's a feedback a lot of women get, is that they're too in the detail or they're too much of a subject matter expert and they can't step into that uncertainty. What were some of the, whether you'd call them tools or developments or shifts in you that allowed that to happen?
Yeah, I think there's a degree that there's no choice in it, really. If you want to kind of expand in your leadership, most organizations are now dealing with reasonable complexity, both sort of, internal complexity, around change programs or external environments. And so for me, there was a degree of just saying, okay, that is what leadership in most organization looks like. And so I want to step into that space, having lots of people around me who are strategic, and help me develop, and having those conversations, and you can often have the person who is your boss or who's around you, but also seeking out other people. I've always had lots of a wide kind of network of you could call them mentors, peers, others. And then I think over the course of the last year, obviously I've been doing various parts of your program. For me, working through what are some of the kind of ingrained beliefs or kind of what I would call emotional constraints that makes you want to look like you're busy, be the doer, not take the risk of delegation. So working through all of those, I think, has also been huge for me, and really seeing this sort of the strategic advice and leadership as the real value that you bring, as opposed to just the amount of work you churn through all the doing, and really, I guess, shifting shifting my identity to see myself as a strategic leader that brings kind of big, good sort of strategic and political strategy kind of advice through, has been a big part of it as well.
Yeah, we often talk about that get shit doneness, and I think that was probably your language when we first found each other. As you
Yeah.
said, stuck in the doing, stuck in the weeds. It's been a really interesting transformation. I'd love if you'd be happy to share, because so many women who are listening to this podcast, obviously those that are in our world, know how we do this. But how would you describe that journey to shift some of that emotional baggage and shift your identity? Because it's something that is bandied around, but it's very hard, obviously, without coming to say, join our programs. That's a very easy solution. And Karen's been to 2 retreats as well, in-person retreats, and is booked in to come to a US retreat soon. So there'll be 3 retreats within 12 months. So we're obviously doing something right, that she keeps coming back, and she's in our back-end programs, and she's been there for a while. So, she's invested heavily in yourself as well, which I think is a part of this, right? Of you saying, okay, I can't shift this identity myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I came into the program, I'd had about a year or so where I'd been getting sick quite a lot. And so that was my big driver, was just feeling like I kept getting sick. And then when I came back from being sick, I had this kind of accumulation of work for me, and this feeling like, oh, because I'd been away, I had to work twice as hard. And then, of course, it was kind of in this cycle. My son and my family really probably paid the price the most, that even when I was there, I was either exhausted or I had in my head everything from work. And so I was present, but I wasn't really. And so I kind of knew, I was enjoying work and I was achieving things, but I wasn't living life in the way that I guess I wanted to. And I was going to be seconded into an executive role. And I kind of knew that would be more pressure, more responsibility. I wanted that challenge, but I also knew I couldn't just sort of step up to that without something changing. And so that's when I started the kind of 8-week program, which became 10 weeks because, of course, I got sick in the middle of it. I think you can often do courses that are sort of like this leadership tool. So if you're in this meeting, you do it in this way or whatever. But I think the difference was really kind of, I guess, looking inwards and looking at the kind of the different layers and, what I thought was great and what I wanted to keep on to, and what was kind of holding me back and making me construct my life in a way that I didn't think was quite right for me. And that's where I think the in-person retreats, which is why I keep signing up to them, you're really held in an environment with a whole lot of other women who are working through things in the same way, and with you and Jacqueline really holding space for you to kind of really in a safe way say, okay, what are the beliefs that I've accumulated in my life? What are the tools that I need to be able to kind of manage those? And I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest initial shift was I would let things emotionally get to me. And that was what was kind of draining me and exhausting me. I couldn't let things go. So if a situation or a person or something was frustrating me, I really took it on, and I kind of really fought environments a lot more. And that's what was exhausting me. Like, even when I could manage my hours, it was the kind of emotional stuff that I was taking on. And I think that was around, wanting to make sure that everything was done really well, and like my image and, all of that stuff. So there was a lot of kind of, how do I not take on that emotional baggage? And once you've released a lot of that and you're calmer with that, then you can start being a lot more strategic, because you've got a lot more headspace, you've got a lot more energy. And so that, I think, has been the big transition for me, is because I'm in a role that does do change, the ability to say, okay, here's what needs to change, but that doesn't mean I need to fight the current environment. It doesn't mean I need to feel like I'm constantly in battle, even though I can identify that we are going to need to do something differently, or the way something's working needs to be done differently. So that's what's kind of created the space, really, for me to start to step into that more strategic kind of leadership role. So yeah, it's been a journey, and it's, obviously I'm still on it. So
It's a beautiful explanation of it, because, as you said, very often at work, the tasks themselves aren't that difficult. It's the meaning we make of it, and the proving ourselves, and the emotion that's behind, like you said, the battle and the war and the politics and that's not fair, and what are they going to think of me, and I made a mistake, and it's all of that gumph that goes around it that causes, as you said, the suffering, the sickness, the exhaustion. And it's very easy to get stuck in this sort of spin of keep thinking about it, keep ruminating on it. So there's such freedom, isn't there, when you unlock that headspace? So much more becomes available.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'd often do, which I know talking to others do as well, if you kind of had got the guts to speak up in a meeting, you'd kind of speak up, but then you'd spend the next couple of hours going, oh, did I say too much? How did that come across? Did they understand? What will they think of me? And like, when you can like walk out of a meeting and just go on to your next thing without all of that kind of emotional energy, you just do show up differently, I think, and you have more space. So for me, it was, firstly just creating that, managing my emotional energy better and creating that space. Because there is, we have all these little voices.
We've all got voices. And how have things shifted at home over the last little while now that, you've made some big decisions lately? I guess, how have you seen this impact of extra emotional energy, extra space you've freed up at work? I'm guessing you probably haven't been as sick. I know you've been sick lately, but haven't been as sick as much over the last year. So have you seen those direct shifts?
Yeah, I think so. And the interesting thing is, like, my partner's been completely supportive of me doing retreats and continuing the program, because I think he's seen probably the shift more than anyone. And what I think he'd say is just, there's things that I've been able to kind of handle that have happened that, even when they are frustrating or upsetting or whatever, they're just nothing near how I would have managed it sort of a year or so ago, that I can just be less emotionally drained from it. I can analyze it. I can kind of navigate through it. Yeah. And so that's been, I think, that the biggest thing has been him kind of seeing that. And I think in our relationship, I've been able to learn to articulate things a lot more and explain them without bringing as much emotional kind of stress to it. And that's really helped kind of our communication. I remember the first retreat I went to, I came, with knowing I had these work things I wanted to deal with. And of course, you just go where you need to go. But it became a lot more about me personally, not just at work as well. So I think it's helped the relationship. And in the program, you do kind of do time audits and make sure you're carving out where you want time, but it's more kind of headspace and energy than just time, and really making the most of the time that you've got. And so, that's been important. And when you see your value as bringing that sort of strategic leadership, that stops kind of defining yourself as hours. And so if you want to prove yourself, you don't just do 60 or 70 hours, you actually bring more strategy and more analysis, and that's not just about hours. It's not to say I don't work hard, but or haven't been working hard, but it's a different what you think you're bringing to the workplace, I think.
Yeah, a complete 180 mindset shift. Speaking of the future, you've made some big decisions lately. How have you, I guess, would love for you to share what some of those decisions are and how you have coped. Most women who come into our world tend to go against the grain in terms of what we want out of life. How have you coped with and have you had any perceived judgment of yourself or others about what your plans are?
Yeah. So I made the decision just over a month ago to leave my job without another job to go to. um, and plan to sort of take a break. And a few things kind of led to that. One of the big ones was, as I said, I've got a 9-year-old son, and I can kind of see that he's shifting from being sort of a child that needs me to kind of heading into sort of teenagehood. And his friends are becoming more important. He's becoming more independent. And I thought, oh, there's this window here where he still kind of wants to hang out with mum. um, and even though I feel like I've been carving out really good time with him, I want to spend more time with him while I've got this kind of window. And I also know that I still overweight in terms of work, even though I've done a lot of work on it. I still get a lot of my kind of human need of sort of significance or importance or status or all of that from work. And I've been doing work on that, and I feel like I've got more balance, but I'm like, actually, I'm going to throw myself into that discomfort of not having work and really building my sense of sort of importance and significance elsewhere. And then when I want to go back into the workplace, that will fit in with the rest of me as opposed to the rest of me trying to fit in with work. So, I made that decision about kind of five or so weeks ago. And it's been a really interesting journey. I think walking away from a sort of a good executive role when almost every week there's articles about how terrible the employment market is here, and lots of people are losing their jobs, I'm in Wellington, across the public sector. And so I think brave was the word people used the most, which I really hadn't seen it. I'd just seen it as a very personal decision, and I hadn't really seen it as a kind of a leadership action. But actually, it's created some really interesting conversations with people about prioritizing your family, prioritizing what you want to do outside of work. Not being chained to a job for your identity, and so it's been really interesting, the kind of depth of conversation I've had with people at work, lots of mums talking about their journey of being a parent, and a worker, has been really interesting. And I think, there's been a few wobbles. I have to not read the articles that say, no one can get jobs, and kind of being like, oh, in 6 months or so, am I going to look back? But yeah, so there's a few moments where I'm like having to be quite intentional about just trusting what will come, and trusting this decision. Yeah, it's been an interesting one.
And I think a really beautiful opportunity. I love the way you said, this is your chance to build your significance in a different way and to go against the grain. It does take a lot of courage to not listen to the fear that's out there about, oh, what if, and to really back yourself. And I love that, whenever it is time to go back, whenever that is for you, you've got a whole now different perspective on your skill set and what you bring. So I presume, as is very typical around here, the role that you go for will be very different than maybe what you would have gone for a couple of years ago. And you don't feel that just because you've had 6 months out, or however long it ends up being, you have to justify your break. I love that it was a really intentional one, not a, we see so many women hit the button of, I can't cope, I'm going to take a break. And it's done from a place of fear, as opposed to yours is such a beautiful, empowered, conscious choice. Like, no, this is what I'm choosing. I could work if it's not that I can't work, but now I choose something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was about, it was probably a 3-month decision-making process for me. And the 3 months was hard to kind of, but once I'd made the decision, then, yeah, the sense of kind of opportunity really came over me. And there's so many things that, I want to be doing and want to be working on, that when you sort of create that space, then your mindset goes to, okay, what can I fill it with? Obviously, I've got going to the US retreat, and lots of things with the family, and some travel, and all these other things. So, I mean, obviously, it's a privileged position. But yeah, I also think I think it is probably a little bit my style to go in to an organization for 3, 4, 5 years, sort of take it through a period of time, and then take a break. And, part of the fear was like, oh, maybe it'll look bad on my CV that I've only been there 3.5 years and I'm bouncing around too much. And then I was like, actually, no, that probably is me. Like, that is my CV. It's, I'm not going to stay in an organization for 15 years doing the same thing. I'm going to kind of come in at a time when there's some complexity, and help lead through it. So I think also just accepting that is me, and maybe it's not the norm, or not the safest, or whatever word you want to use, but that's how I have impact.
Yeah, but that's that's beautiful, because what that's such a great demonstration of is, yourself and your worth, and you're not worried about what other people think. Whereas the person who's worried about their CV is worried about what other people think. Whereas you're like, nah, own it. This is who I am. This is how I work best. I'm not going to be your next 15-year employee. That's not what I'm here for. I always say that there are different types of people. I was like you. I'd go into an organization and I loved the change. I loved shaking it up. I loved breaking it apart and putting it back together. But once it was humming again, I'm like, I'm kind of bored. I need another challenge. I'm off. And I remember saying that to one of my CEOs. I'm not your BAU person. But there's such almost respect that you gain from recognizing your skill set, and recognizing and owning, this is what I'm really good at, and being able to step into that is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was looking at where the organization was going, and there's some more challenges coming up. And I could feel in myself that I wasn't kind of leaning in the way that I would have normally, and then to step back for a while as well. Because I think, as you say, often you end up right in the heat of it and feeling burnt out, as opposed to what's going to come and what do I need to have to really thrive in what's coming, and recognizing early that that was a period in time where it made sense for them to get a new person into the role before the next phase comes as well. And so yeah, for me, like I said, I didn't see it as leadership, but then afterwards I was like, oh yeah, there was some leadership in there.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And one thing we talk a lot about in our world is intuition. And you said, this was not a not an easy decision to make. How have you really, and I know this kind of comes in with the strategic piece, how have you found your intuition has shifted or maybe opened up or got access to as you've dealt with the emotional baggage and got more of that headspace? How's that worked for you?
Oh, I think hugely. And I think being able to balance, I guess, kind of, data points or information with your tuition is really, understanding those both have strength, I think, is a huge parts of leadership. And people do often do say to me, like, how do you know that? Like when I'm saying, okay, I think this might happen or things might go here, this is how this might play out. They're like, how do you know? And I'm kind of like, oh, I just kind of know, you know? And it's because I can take a whole lot of data points, add it with my intuition, and kind of think about where things might go. I guess that's the sort of strategic part of strategic leadership. And I think just trusting that. Like I think earlier I would have thought it, like I knew I had it there, but I wouldn't have articulated it as much. I wouldn't have talked to others about it because it's hard to explain. You can't just say, okay, well, this is 86% this data point or whatever. So yeah, so I think that has definitely kind of strengthened, and I've been able to tap into it more, and that has meant I'm more useful to the organization, I think, when you can kind of bring that. And I think because I've always had a lot of stakeholder work, I think also being able to kind of, I guess, tap into how stakeholders are going and what might be going on, and therefore what we might need to do to just adjust that, not even necessarily when they've really kind of said it, but when you can just kind of sense it. And I think that's what has also allowed me to do a lot of stakeholder work in my career and in the last year, is being able to tap into, or it just feels like they've got, like, just even things like, oh, that feels like they're probably really busy even though they haven't said it. And so just to back off a little bit. So I think it's allowed me to do better stakeholder work as well as that kind of strategic work, for sure.
Absolutely. There's something about dealing with other humans that the more we can use those spidey senses, and so many women shut it down. If we don't have a data point, as you said, and the corporate world is very data driven, and that's great to a point. But there is something magical when a woman starts to access that new level of intuition, which I love seeing you do.
Yeah, and especially because there was there is a lot, but in the last year there was a lot of uncertainty externally, right? And so within the uncertainty, you have to be piecing together kind of what you can of information to navigate through. And part of that is your sense of where things could go. And it's not it is going to go, it's a could go. And that's where your intuition, I think, allows you to start to see potential paths, that the data, because there's no data there, because it's what might be coming, you don't know. I think that's where kind of intuition or guesswork, as you could call it, is kind of useful as well. And again, it's not giving anyone certainty, but it's being able to kind of be prepared for some scenarios that might come forward. Just the leadership, strategic leadership.
Yeah, but as you said, as you cultivate your own intuition and as you start to trust it more, then when you share, I've got this feeling, or I suspect this may happen, when you're more in alignment with your intuition, people that lands more, because when you're like, oh, I think this might go this way, they're like, are you really sure? Because you're not actually in alignment with that thought. But I think what's probably been beautiful about your journey is, as you've trusted that intuition more, as you've stepped into it more, you're communicating it with more power, with more authenticity. And so then it lands, which I think has probably been a really powerful part of your journey too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and learning how to, yeah, articulate it in a way that lands for people, I think, is absolutely a big part of it. It's trusting it yourself firstly, and then it's being able to communicate it in a way that people can sort of understand, for sure. And that's been a big part of my sort of development, stepping onto the executive as well, because we're obviously got a lot of information coming to us, a lot of decision making, and being able to kind of, I guess, find my voice within that, and that intuition as part of that's been a big part of my journey, for sure.
And then I guess final question for you is, what advice would you give to anyone who is stuck where you were in the weeds, but knowing they have more potential, maybe sick all the time, unable to concentrate at home? What would you say to them?
I mean, I would say to them, I mean, I think a lot of your development happens in the workplace, but I think you have to create space outside of the workplace to be able to really do the analysis and the kind of depth of work, go to different layers. And so, so I would say, make sure you're creating that space. And obviously, there's lots of different programs and retreats and things to be kind of leaning into. But I would say, yeah, you need that. Even though I've developed a lot in my career and I've done different courses, I think that the deeper work allows you to just be so much stronger, to navigate so much more. So yeah, I would say create that space. Make sure you're finding that space to do that work, and become the kind of leader you want to be, but create the kind of life that you want to as well. Because the program's obviously not just about work; it's about sort of your whole life. And I think lots of women in leadership do go against the grain, and that's not easy. And so you need to have those spaces where you're with others who are doing the same thing, and be kind of held in those environments, so that you, I guess, kind of have an environment where you feel normal, but also where you're safe to kind of to do the work. That would be my biggest advice. It's been game changing for me, for sure.
I love that. Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. I'm very excited to see what the next 6 months hold. Obviously, we're going to get to hang out in the US, which is going to be lots of fun. And I'm sure wherever you end up is going to get an amazing leader who's going to be respected and a role model for how women can do this life differently. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Jo.
Thanks for joining us today on the Balance and Beyond podcast. We're so glad you carved out this time for yourself. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who might need to hear this today. And if you're feeling extra generous, leaving us a review on your podcast platform of choice would mean the world to us. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Balance and Beyond podcast.